Laker. This show, Cobra USA, emanates from Radio Tribune right here in Las Vegas at 717 South 9th Street. That's about the corner of 9th and Charleston. We'll give you that information so that you can either come in if you like, write in, send us a postcard, any way that you'd like to communicate with us. Now today's topic is an interesting one. Yes, very interesting, because the subject of today's debate is involved in the political system and has been doing that for a very, very long time. And his name is Harry Reid, better known as Dirty Harry. Now, we hear that all the time. We have been able to put some of the pieces together, and we're going to share those with you today. Now, you might say a lot of this is speculation. Not with him, and not when he's concerned. So I'm going to give you a little background information about what we do know. We do know that Harry Reid has a wide influence of friends, political heavyweights that he can talk to and turn to for the support and help that he needs, either financially or otherwise. And a case in point is right here in Las Vegas. Actually, it's in Henderson. Mayor Hafen. Yes, Mayor Hafen, who's going to be running for re-election here, has been involved with Harry for a very long time. You see, Dirty Harry wanted to get his son as the attorney for Henderson. But his son didn't have the credentials. So in order to make sure that he got the job, Dirty Harry made a little call to Hafen, Mayor Hafen, and said, look, you know, my son is running for attorney in the city of Henderson. What can you do? And I'm sure Hafen said, well, look, Harry, you know, my hands are tied. There's not much I can do. Well, let me give you a little suggestion. How about if we modify the rules? Let's make an exception in this case, because he's a great attorney. Never mind that he's my son. Never mind that he's involved with me in the political dramas. Let's just make the change. And all the other qualified candidates that you have are finished, gone. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Mayor Hafen did. Changed the rules so that Harry's son could become the attorney for the city of Henderson. And I believe the salary was $250,000 a year. Pretty nice for a telephone call. How would you like to have someone call and get you an appointment that you're not qualified for? Now let me talk a little bit more about Mayor Hafen. You see, Mayor Hafen has 6 relatives working on the city's payroll. Oh yes, in high administrative offices, of course. So you can see how easily it is to use the power that's within your grasp to make sure, to ensure that the rules and the regulations are the way you want them. In other words, a dictatorship. I don't think that that's what we want here in the United States. I don't think it's what we want here in Las Vegas. Now, when I came to Las Vegas, Oscar Goodman had come in. Well, I came here in the 1950s, and I believe Oscar came in at about 54. We're both out of Philadelphia. And the only reason I mention Oscar is because he did become a mayor too. and won with an exorbitant number, somewhere in the 90% of vote. But can we compare one to the other? Well, yes and no. Oscar represented members of the mob. But that was his job. That's what he had to do. So certainly he would recognize when illegal activities were taking place. Mayor Hafen has stretched the law. He's made the law fit his purposes. And while he may have done some good for Henderson, Henderson was going to develop anyway, under his administration or someone else's. But is that the way we have to deal with political positions today? What happened to the electoral process? And how is the electoral process aided and abetted by those in special places? Well, that's what we started to talk about today. And I want to continue on that line because we're talking about Harry Reid. And Harry Reid, still up to the same old tricks, got involved in the presidential election by being able to try and put forth evidence that Donald Trump was involved somehow with Russia. And there's a very long story about that. So, and it's still in the air, but not what Harry Reid did. You see, when you're in a position like that, you can pick up the phone, you can call the Attorney General, you can try to tell them what their job is. And you can ask for special favors. Well, how can anybody ask for special favors especially in a political campaign, especially in a presidential election? How can anybody go down that road? Harry Reid did. He went to the FBI. Said, I'd like to find out who's involved in this. All for the good of America. And of course what he meant was it was for the good of America under a Hillary Clinton regime. Political bias? Yes. Trying to retain control? Yes. Trying to make sure that the deck is stacked. That's what it's all about. It's about power and control. So when we talk about the abuse of power, we need to look into it even in greater depth, and particularly with people who are in a position of authority who have abused that authority. Oh, yes, and now the rest of the story. You see, Harry Reid was also involved at Bundy's Ranch. Yes. Almost the start of World War III. You see, probably you don't know, because he tries to keep it under hat, that Harry Reid owns 93 acres of property adjacent to the Bundy property. 93 acres adjacent to Bundy's property. Now, how did all this come about with good old Harry? Well, let's just put it this way. He made a deal with the Chinese for his benefit, for him and his two sons. A deal to acquire that property to develop solar. That deal was made, and all Harry had to do was deliver the land. Well, it just so happened that good old Harry happened to know the director of the BLM in Nevada. Very close friends. And he said, well, you know, the way to get rid of Bundy is to take his cattle. Oh, are we forgetting something, Blue? Yes, we are. We're forgetting that Mr. Bundy, Cliven Bundy, by the way, had a dispute with the BLM many, many years ago. Oh, and by the way, before we get too far down the road, almost all of the farmers and cattle people have lost their leases with the BLM. Oh, well, how could that be? They bought them out, that's how. And why did they buy them out? For control, for power, and for generations of income to follow. That's why. So let's take this story just a little bit further. Considering the fact that Harry had all of this power within his grasp, they set up the takeover of the Bundy Ranch holdings to take their cattle, because if they took their cattle, they would put him out of business. If he was out of business, he had no chance. So they used the blatant excuse that he did not pay fees for 20 years. Oh, and now the other side of the story. You see, that part isn't taken care of yet. What happened is this. Bundy had gone to the BLM, had hearings. And remember, the BLM is the supreme authority when it comes to our lands. Our lands. And BLM has supreme authority. Oh, and that's another story. States' rights. I'm not going into that today, but we will. In essence, what took place at the Bundy Ranch was, as described, they intended to come in, take his cattle, slaughter them, or, well, what else would they do with them? Impound them and let them grow fatter. Ultimately, taking over his possessions. But we started to say there was a conflict with the determination with the Bureau of Land Management. You see, under the agreement that he signed, the BLM was supposed to return some of that money for maintenance of those properties. That's right, maintenance of the properties. To make roads, to make water holes, to take care of other things that are associated with the pasturing rights. But you know what? Cliven Bundy said, wait a minute, folks. You want me to pay money, but you aren't willing to do your share. We have a contract that says you are going to pay us to maintain those properties. And so until you do, we are not paying our fees. What other choice does the typical lay person have against the supreme authority of the BLM, the FBI, and the federal government? Little, if none. And Bundy, being the last holdout, had to be made. He had to be made as a villain. Can you imagine that? A man that has been there ever since his life began, and his father and grandfather before him were there doing exactly the same thing. And then the FBI and the BLM in their wise wisdom decided that we need to take this away from him because it's the only way we're going to stop him from grazing on the land. Well, let me ask you this. They stopped him from grazing on the land. Then what happens with the land? Well, in these circumstances, we know that Harry Reid and his sons, Rory and the other one, were in cahoots, collusion, to take over that property through the BLM, a sweetheart deal, in order to accommodate the Chinese for the solar energy projects. Now that's as long as it is short. Let's talk about why. Why this happened. And I'm talking about when the opposition showed up to try to support one of their fellow human beings who was being abused by the political system. In my conversation with Ryan Bundy, Cliven's son, I had asked him personally. I've been to his ranch. I had dinner with him and his children. And I know what kind of people they are. Hard-working, religious people who go by the laws of God and are there for one purpose: to do their cattle business. And to have that denied, to have that taken away from them after hundreds of years is not realistic and is not the American way. So how did Harry put this together? Well, it's pretty simple. He knows so many people. He just sets them up. And that's what they attempted to do here. They attempted to set him up, to close him down and take his property. Now you can say, well, how did Harry Reid get involved? I've already explained that. He had a deal with the Chinese. But you don't hear about that. You hear about these villains, armed villains, who were going to shoot the FBI. Well, I don't think that's exactly the way it was. It wasn't an ambush like Bonnie and Clyde, where the FBI agents set up, yes, with one of the farmers, to let them know when Bonnie and Clyde were coming down the road. An ambush. And of course they blasted away. Well, they only needed a couple bullets to kill him. They riddled that car with so many bullets it was almost impossible to count them. That's exactly what has happened here with Cliven Bundy and this uprising, is that they set him up so they could take him apart. They managed to put several people in with the Cliven Bundy group. Keep in mind that Bundy does not have an organization. He does not have an organization that he calls together when he needs it. No. These people came from 1,000 miles away. And why? Because they were willing to stand up for their American rights. And we need to do the same thing. We need to step up for America. We need to make sure that our American rights are not stripped from us entirely. Keep in mind what I said about the number of cattlemen and ranchers who have been put out of business by the BLM over, quote unquote, their property. Excuse me, it's not their property. Before Nevada became a state, in 1860, I may not have that information today, but I'll have it Monday when I do the next show. But when and before they became a state, Nevada was granted all of the land in Nevada, the citizens of Nevada. And then Nevada became a state. Unfortunately, the people of that time and era, the 1820s or 1860s, I think it was, were primarily miners and farmers. Not necessarily well educated, not illiterate, but not up to or aware of the many tricks that the government has in their bag of tricks. And so, because Nevada wanted to become a state, they were open to negotiations. Wow, what a one-sided deal this was. We're giving up 95% of our land for the opportunity of becoming a state. Well, I want to ask you this. If you don't have a state, then why do you need a state? We could have been a colonial or a colony. You understand what I'm saying? I'm saying this. In order to be considered a state, you have to own it. At least most of it. So maybe we're not a state in Nevada. Maybe that's something we need to look at. But what we're saying is this. Nevada was given its land before it became a state. And then by trickery, they were conned out of it. And that's the way it is today, with over 85% of Nevada's property belonging to the federal government, who can't own property. Well, yeah, but the BLM maintains that property. Yeah, sure. The BLM sells property, our property. The BLM manages all the minerals and resources on the property. The BLM takes all of that money. And where it goes from there, we don't know. But what we do know is Nevada is suffering because of it. And they say, well, some people, the naysayers, for example, say, well, Nevada could never manage that much property. Well, anybody could do a better job than the federal government. Anybody. It's always been that way. See, but the worst part of that is this. We don't get any of that gain. Well, maybe they're giving it back to us in federal aid. Oh, so you're saying that if we owned it, we would still have that federal aid? Maybe not. Because if we owned it and we did our job and we had a clean system that ensured that the properties would be self-maintaining, meaning that the monies generated off those properties would be enough to keep them in good shape. And then you say, well, wait a minute, when you talk about good shape, what do you mean? Are you talking about the wild horses? Are you talking about the desert tortoise? Or some of the other species that the BLM claims are declining? Well, let's look at the desert tortoise, for example. The desert tortoise is supposed to be a protected species. And we don't want to take away their habitat. Right? Wrong. Contrary to the opinion that has been broadcast, the BLM has destroyed almost 100,000 of these desert tortoise. Euthanasia. So how are we talking about, what are we talking about if you say, well, they're exterminating them, but we need to make sure that they survive? That's a little hard to justify when you are annihilating them. And what about the wild horses? And what about the fact that these animals have been around for centuries and centuries and centuries, and that we have invaded their habitat, taken it away from them, and then we have said, well, we need to conserve, and we need to make sure that we have space for man. Isn't that what we said to the Indians? Isn't that what we did to the Indians? Well, Dirty Harry fits right in that patch. He would have made an excellent negotiator for the federal government back in the 1860s when we were negotiating to be a state. I would call that extortion. And we're going to be talking more and more about just that, extortion. About people like Harry Reid. About the Reid dynasty. And how they have managed very successfully. And of course, if you have someone in back of you with so much power, it's not just his power, but the power of other people who can put into place things that you could not possibly do by yourself. Well, today's show is running a little short on time right now. And even though I'd like to continue with this conversation, I want to say that this is not over yet. That what's happened here with the abundance is going to reverberate when the facts and the information come out. Well, you say, well, why haven't the facts and the information come out now? Because the court system has suppressed the information. Oh, you see, that reign of power is not just limited to the lower branches. It goes into the judicial branches as well. Now, can they control a jury? It remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. But one of the best stories of this generation is going to be the exposure of Harry Reid and the corruption that he has laid out. So this is Blu Laker again, and we would invite you to come by at 717 South 9th Street to join in the show, to voice your opinion, and if you want to call in at 702-743-8297. 743-8297. This is Blu Laker, this is Cobra USA, and we emanate right here at Radio Tribune. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Yeah, hey, it's Lou. Did you catch the closing?
Okay, thank you. All right, bye.
Bye.
At the tone, please record your voice message. When you are finished recording, you may hang up or press pound for more options.
Yes, Teresa, this is Lou, and I stopped by to pick up that information, and of course he didn't have it, didn't even know about it. He said he's going to send it to me on my email. I'm talking about the demand letter. If you get a chance, give me a call. 702-743-8297. And a couple other things.